In this video, I'm going to show you the easiest way to visualize 7th chords on the piano. And not just 7th chords like this, where you have all of the notes in order, root, 3rd, 5th, 7th, but also 7th chords like this, and of course not just on C, but on other notes as well. And then not just dominant 7ths, but also minor 7th chords, and major 7ths. So they all might look a bit complicated if you're not super fluent with 7th chords yet, but I will show you one trick later on in this video which will make them much easier to visualize. Now before continuing, you will of course need to know a few things. So you'll need to know your major or minor triads really well. And by that, I don't just mean knowing that this in theory is C major, but you need to be able to put your hand on any major triad straight away without hesitation. So E flat, F sharp major, A flat, and so on. And then not just in root position, but also first inversion. So not just C, F, G like this, but also C, F, G like that. Then also second inversion, C, F, G. And you'll need to have the same fluency with your minor triads as well. So E flat minor, G sharp minor, G minor, and you'll need to know those in different inversions. You'll also need to know sevenths, what a seventh is. You need to know that C to B flat is a seventh and C to B is a major seventh. And then you'll need to know tones and semitones. So this is a tone, this is a semitone. That's quite a lot of stuff. I'm assuming that if you're clicking on a video that teaches you the best way of visualizing 7th chords, you probably already know that stuff. If you don't, I will put links below this video to tutorials I've done covering all of those things before. So if you don't know any of those, go and master those first before you work through this video. Otherwise, you're going to get overwhelmed. But assuming you know that stuff, let us get going. So let's just start with C7 chord. So something straightforward. If I say C7, you're probably picturing something like this. So where you have all 4 notes of the chord, probably in the left hand and in order, root, 3rd, 5th, 7th. However, even though this maybe is the right way of playing C7 in a limited number of contexts, it has a few limitations. So the main limitation of playing C7 like this is that the bass note is a bit high. Basses usually sound better when they're a couple of octaves or 3 octaves below middle C. So if we just move that bass note down an octave, immediately we get a fuller sound if that's what you want. So usually this is going to sound better than this. And then the second limitation of this is that all of the notes are clustered together in this particular arrangement. Maybe instead of this, we actually want to play this. Maybe we want to move that 3rd up an octave and play it here. So just comparing those 2 ways of playing C7, it's the same 4 notes, but rearranging them, we get a fuller sound. But then the problem with this is that this is much harder to recognize as a C7 chord than this is. So this video is going to be all about allowing you to recognize a 7th chord arranged like this or in some other inversion just as easily as you can recognize it when it's in its simplest form, root, 3rd, 5th, 7th. So in order to do that, let's go back a step and just look at 7ths by themselves. So what is a 7th? The easiest way of thinking about a 7th is that it's a tone less than an octave. So octave C, if we take that top note down a tone, or you might know this as a step rather than a half step. If we take the top note down a tone, we get a 7th. That is the easiest way of thinking of a 7th. Instead of starting here and counting up 7 notes, which is kind of crazy because you have to count the first one again, just think of a 7th as a tone less than an octave. So I cover this in another tutorial if you need practice on 7ths. So a 7th is a tone less than an octave. So let's go back to a C chord, and this time let's just play a simple C triad. Now again, let's think of those 2 principles. Bass lines usually sound good when they're a couple of octaves below the middle of the keyboard, but the other chord notes tend to sound good if they're in the middle of the keyboard. So if you're playing piano, that means in practical terms, the left hand's going to be playing the bass note and the right hand's going to be playing the other notes of the chord. So let's start with that arrangement for a simple C major triad. So we have C in the bass, and we just have a C triad in root position in the right hand. Well, looking at this chord, we have the C doubled, we have the root of the chord here and here. And now if we want to turn this into a C7 chord, well, another way of thinking of a seventh as being a tone less than the octave is we can say that a seventh is a tone below the root. So if C is the root of the chord, in this case C major, we can picture the root up here and take the root down a tone and it becomes a seventh. So if we now apply that to the C major triad, where we have the root duplicated, let's keep the root in the bass, but we'll take this duplicate root in the right hand, move it down a tone, and now that chord becomes C7. So hopefully there, if you're kind of seeing this as a rearrangement of this chord, it's quite hard visualizing how all these notes got rearranged, because we're kind of moving the bass down an octave, then we're taking the third and the fifth and moving them up an octave. It even confuses me saying it. That's not how I would think about these chords. I would picture this as just a C triad with the root moved down a tone in the right hand. And suddenly that C7 chord is much easier to visualize. So we can do that starting with a different inversion of a C triad in the right hand. So instead of starting with a root position triad, we can start with a first inversion triad. So now the root is up here. Always keep track in the right hand of which notes of the chord you're playing. So we have third, fifth, and root. We want to move the root down a tone. I mean, it's really easy to recognize the root. It's the one that's the same as the bass note. So we have a C down here, and you want to move the C up here down a tone. If we move that C down a tone, that's going to be a seventh, so that's C7. That one's pretty easy to recognize because you have third, fifth, and seventh in order. And lastly, we could start with a second inversion C chord, so that would be this. Let's move it down an octave. C major in second inversion. Again, we're going to take the root in the right hand, which is the same as the bass note, move the root down a tone, and we get C7. So I'm going to give you a structure for practicing seventh chords in those inversions, and then I will show you how to apply a similar technique to work out minor seventh chords and major seventh chords. So if you're not super familiar with playing seventh chords in different arrangements like that, start by simply playing a root position triad in the right hand and the bass in the left. And let's try it on a different note. So let's pick one that sounds difficult. Let's take F sharp major. F sharp major triad is pretty simple. It's the only major triad that's entirely made up of black notes. Let's put the F sharp in the bass. And now we're going to take the root in the right hand and move it down a tone. So you need to know your tones and semitones. Tone is 2 notes down, so 1, 2, makes it E, and that is F sharp 7. So potentially quite a tricky chord, but if you know your F sharp major triad and you just move the root down a tone, keeping the root in the bass, then you get F sharp 7. So initially you're going to be playing the root position triad in the right hand and then moving the root down a tone. And then once you've got used to that, try playing the seventh chord straight away. So using C as an example again, you can be picturing a C triad in the right hand, but then try and play the seventh straight away. So you can be picturing C as the root in the right hand, but just play the seventh straight away without playing the simple triad first. So again, doing that with E flat, you can be picturing E flat as the root in the right hand, but then straight away go and play the note that's a tone below the root, and so on. So try that with lots of different notes until you've mastered that kind of arrangement where you're starting with the root position triad in the right hand. Then once you feel really comfortable with that arrangement of seventh chords, you can then do the same, but instead of starting with a root position triad in the right hand, start with a first inversion triad. So again, C, starting with a simple triad and then taking the root down a tone. Try it on different notes. G, A flat, just jump around, A major. And then again, once you're pretty fluent with that, you can try playing the seventh chord straight away. So if we start with F, you can be picturing the the root F here, but then instead of playing that F, play the note a tone below it, so you're playing F7 straight away. And keep practicing that until you get really fluent with those. And then of course lastly, you're going to be starting with second inversion triads in the right hand. Let's do that with F sharp. F sharp in second inversion, take the root down a tone, confusing myself. Do that with lots of different chords. And then again, after a while, try playing the 7th chord straight away. So you're hitting those chords really quickly and instantly. So that is how you can structure your practice so that you can then play any kind of 7th chord really quickly and fluently in the right hand, playing different kinds of inversions. You can then use exactly the same technique for minor 7 chords. So the only difference then is that instead of starting with a major triad and taking the root down a tone, you're going to start with a minor triad and take the root down a tone to produce a minor 7 chord. So let's just recap the theory of minor 7 chords. A minor 7 chord is a minor triad with a 7th rather than a major triad with a 7th. So if we start with a minor triad in the right hand and take the root down a tone, we get a minor 7 chord. So that is C minor 7. And then the practice progression is going to be exactly the same as it was for just straight 7th chords. So you can start with practicing root position triads in the right hand and taking the root down a tone to produce a minor 7 chord. So F would be this. Take the root down a tone, we get F minor 7. If we start with D, take the root down a tone, we get D minor 7, and so on. And then you can practice jumping straight to the 7th chord, and so on lots of different notes. And then once you've mastered starting with root position triads in the right hand, you can start with first inversion minor triads in the right hand, take the root down a tone, you get a minor 7 chord. And then you can practice going straight to the 7th chord. So E flat minor 7, A flat minor 7, D minor 7, and so on. F sharp minor 7. Just jump around the keyboard hitting chords at random, checking your response time and maybe practicing any ones you slip up on. And then lastly, we have major 7 chords. So a major 7 chord is a major triad with a major 7th. And a major 7th is a semitone less than an octave rather than a tone less than an octave. So again, an easy way to think of this is that a major 7th is a semitone less than the root, or a half step less than the root, if you're used to the terminology half step. That means that to construct a major 7th chord the same way, we're going to start with a major triad again, but this time instead of taking the root down a tone, we're going to take it down a semitone, and that produces C major 7. So let's do that on a different chord. Start with E flat major, take the root down a semitone, just the next note down, and we have E flat major 7. This kind of sounds a bit like George Harrison's Something. Anyway, so it may sound familiar to you from various songs. Again, you can do that in different inversions. So if you start with, let's say, F sharp major, let's jump straight to second inversion this time. Just take the root in the right hand, which is the same as the bass, take it down a semitone, and you now have an F sharp major 7 chord. So this would be a pretty hard chord to recognize, again, if you were sort of constructing it, starting with the triad major 7th and then kind of putting the bass note down an octave and moving this third up an octave. That would be a very hard way of thinking about this as an F sharp major 7 chord. But if you're just familiar with your major triads and you can recognize this as F sharp major, and you can just take that root down a tone, then you can construct F sharp major 7 pretty easily. So I'll just give you one example of that. So this is maybe the most famous example of major 7 chords. Satie's Gymnopédie number 1. So if we look at this chord, this is G major 7, because that F is a semitone below the root. That would be G major. This is G major 7 chord. And then this is D major 7, because this note is a semitone below the root. That would be a straight D chord. Take the root down a semitone, we get D major 7, G major 7, D major 7. So that also touches on something which is pretty useful too about this technique, which is that you can use it to analyze music you can already play. So far in this video, I've showed you how to use this technique to construct chords. So maybe you're starting from chord symbols you found online and you want to find different ways of playing a C7 chord rather than always playing it like this. But also, if you do have a chord in a piece you've already played and you want to analyze what's going on in the piece, you can use this technique. So, if you came across this chord, for instance, the easiest way to analyze it is to picture this root right in the middle of the rest of the chord notes. So instead of picturing the root down here and trying to measure how far this distance is, or this one, just picture the root up here. Well, if the root is there, then we have, well, that's the 3rd, that's the 5th, and then a tone below the root is a 7th. So that tells you this is an F sharp 7 chord. Or if we pick another example, let's do this. Slight variation. So again, maybe not that easy to analyze straight away, but if we picture the root in the middle of the other notes of the chord, we can see straight away that's the 3rd and the 5th of an E flat minor triad. This note is a tone below the root, so that's a 7th, so that is E flat minor 7. So I hope you find that useful. I use this technique a lot in my other tutorial videos, so if you've worked through this one, hopefully those other ones will be easier to follow.